Welcome to Democracy-ish. I am your host, Danielle Moodie, and I am so excited this week to be joined by my guest co-host, Charles D. Ellison, who is the host of Reality Check on WURD in Philadelphia. Charles, thank you so much for making the time to hop into Democracy-ish with us, because that is certainly what we are in, a lot of ish.
Right.
This week,
here.
We just had an off-election year, right? Mm-hmm. We had two major races, among others, that we were watching in the country, but particularly eyes were on Virginia. Eyes were on the race of Virginia because you had Glenn Youngkin, an unknown politico but businessman who many are referring to as Trump light. He gives you all of the Trump ideology without all of the bluster. And I had said for many years that so long as Republicans could find somebody that was a little bit more fine-tuned, a little bit more strategic than Donald Trump, then 2020 would have looked a lot different than it did. What were your initial feelings with regard to the fact that after a decade, Virginia has now gone back to red?
There's so many thoughts there, right? And we could have, I really appreciate, Danielle, you inviting me here today to talk with you. We've all seen better days, and especially in the aftermath of this just disaster, this electoral disaster that took place for Democrats. And it's an electoral and also political public policy disaster for our communities, particularly, I'm on WURD. I speak primarily to a black audience, and people are in a real depressed, defeated state right now. But we saw these signs. You saw them. We would talk about them occasionally on WURD in places like Virginia. And Republicans also looking for candidates that were a little less Trumpian cosmetically, because they're realizing that, okay, the Trump that we had, the Donald Trump that we had, maybe that worked in 2016. Now we're knowing 4 years later that doesn't work. Someone a little bit more polished, a little bit more telegenic, younger, who didn't give off that kind of Trump aura or Trump ooze, and they had that in Glenn Youngkin. And I just don't understand it. Here you had Terry McAuliffe, the Democratic nominee. He was a governor before. He was just the last governor before the current one, Ralph Northam, right? Mm-hmm. Just won in 2013, had sort of bucked some historic trends when he won as governor in 2013. Run on your record, Terry. Like, you had a decent record as governor. So that's the first basic thing. I mean, especially if you're going back for the same job. One, run on your record. Two, we're talking about Virginia. Virginia is close to my heart. That's where my mother's family hails from. My grandmother fled the segregated Virginia South and moved to Philadelphia. Was part of that great migration exodus. So I really wanted to see, I always want to see things work out in Virginia. Virginia has an electorate that's over a quarter black. And so that black electorate is the key to winning decisive elections. There were multiple opportunities there, Danielle, right? Glenn Youngkin was basically telling people, telegraphing that, hey, listen, I'm going to return this back to the Virginia 50, 60 years ago. And I heard those stories. I was born at the time when they were just wrapping up legal Jim Crow in Virginia. I was born at that time. And I remember those stories. And I, remember, still white folks having, in Virginia, having hangovers from Jim Crow being over in Virginia, just being around there, just driving around and going into stores, in and out of stores with my grandmother and others. So he was telegraphing to Virginia voters, hey, listen, I want to go back to, hey, I remember when I was in school back in Virginia back in the day, and it was so much better. Now they got this critical race theory thing, which is not even in the schools, it's in law schools. So it's like, how did you miss that opportunity to counteract and repaint him, reportray him as the Jim Crow candidate? I mean, it's as simple as that, and activate and motivate and energize that black electorate while at the same time saying, hey, listen, we're trying to move forward here. This is going to move us backward. Just so many missed opportunities. One last thing too, one quick point here, Daniel, I want to see what your thoughts on this are as well. I can only imagine. I know what your thoughts are, but I want to ask you after to make us this point. Democrats are going to have to embrace the fact that they are, and it's okay, they are the Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian People's Party. They're the BIPOC party. BIPOC party. Yep. It's okay. They need to embrace that. They are the coalition party. They are the Rebel Alliance party. Get it together. And so, so they're having issues embracing the fact that they are the BIPOC, if we want to call it that, the BIPOC party, which is fine. They're a coalitional party. if you're a Republican strategist, your job is easy because all you got to do is worry about white people. So Democrats have to be a little bit more creative and innovative, embrace that. Two, stop hiring these very expensive white political strategists who are dismissive of the power of black, brown, indigenous, but especially black voters in key places like Virginia, because that's what we had with Terry McAuliffe. You got white campaign managers, white political strategists who are overpaid. They don't want to pay black political strategists. I'm going to call it as I see it. They don't want to play very seasoned black political practitioners whom I know personally in the state of Virginia, who get the work done, who got the job done in 2017 and got Ralph in that position right now. And they ignored folks back in Virginia in 2017. Remember Alabama? And they were like, people like Black PAC were like, hey, you got untapped black voters in these corners here. It's like we show them constantly. We're constantly teaching them these lessons, and they ignore them when we come down to the wire. And so there's that. And then, also doing this thing of waiting they did it in Pennsylvania. We had some really serious, crucial judicial elections statewide. Pennsylvania Supreme Court, Pennsylvania Superior Court, Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court. There were 2 black women running for Pennsylvania Superior and Commonwealth Court. Commonwealth Court, by the way, was the only court in the country that voted for Trump when he was trying to reverse or flip the 2020 Pennsylvania election results. How did you mess that up? Right? You know what I mean? Like, who does that? And then you could have had a black woman in there too. So it's just all these missed opportunities, and the fact that especially white Democrats in particular want to be dismissive of the kind of electoral flex that we can offer them. At the end of the day, it's not about Democrats. I'm not here cheerleading for Democrats. It's just like, I don't want the party that represents domestic terrorists getting any more foothold than they already have.
Come on.
I just don't. And that's the only alternative we have right now. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And
Moodie, what do you think?
No, you're so right, because the fact is that Democrats are the BIPOC party, right? And instead of embracing that truth, instead of understanding that here we have a demographic shift that we all know is impending, Republicans have used it to their advantage. They have used it as a fear tactic once again. I talked about this earlier on Instagram Live, and I said, this is the new Red Scare. Remember the Red Scare from the late 1930s going all the way into the beginning of the 1950s?
That's right.
Led by people like U.S. Senator Joseph McCarthy and President Truman and J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI. It was using these relentless tactics to scare the Republic into believing that communism was coming in, and so we needed to use undemocratic tactics in order to suss out those people, suss out those revolutionaries. And this is what Republicans are doing right now. And instead of it being communism that they're having us fear, right, it is critical race theory as their new boogeyman, right? And before that, it was, what about our history? We can't take down Confederate statues because that is our history. And then it was BLM and Antifa in 2020 that were their boogeyman. So it's like they give us the playbook. We see what they are doing, but time and time again, you see Democrats, much in the way that Joe Biden was in your state, Charles, but a couple of weeks ago. Where was he going? Scranton, Pennsylvania. Yeah. Which is his dog whistle, Democrats' dog whistle, to say, hey, working white class people, we see you. As if they are the only working class. When we look at the demographics of who the working class are, it is majority black and brown people and largely women. That's right? And so how is it that we are still chasing after the latest polls, Charles, and I want to get your thoughts on this. The latest polls show that 56% of non-college educated white women, who did they vote for in Virginia? Youngkin. Who did they vote for in 2020? Trump. So tell me why cable news and why all of these outlets and these politicians continue to run after white women, when in fact, it is the BIPOC community that you should be investing in.
You should absolutely be investing in that. And we see the numbers, like even after 2016, right, when Trump won, we saw, and let's take Pennsylvania, for example. We saw that's a critical battleground state. It was the state that was decisive in Trump's win, just like it was decisive in Biden's win in 2020. But we saw hundreds of thousands of untapped black voters. I think it was a Howard University business professor. I forget his name, but I had him on a while back after he wrote this seminal piece. I thought it was one of the best pieces of 2020 he wrote, where he showed us the true numbers in all these critical states, black voters untapped, just left, ignored. And he's like, you guys got to get better at this. Like, he's like, you're just leaving big pockets of voters off in a corner somewhere in these key battleground states. But there is no such thing as a swing voter. It's just white voters.
No.
White voters who will never vote for you.
Yep.
Like, there are white voters who will never vote for you, y'all. Like, just get that. I mean, you're going to have the BIPOC coalition. It's going to be your needed, your essential black voters, your essential brown voters. You might have some Latinos, like that's another conversation, who are probably going to go buck Republican. But for the most part, you got that locked for the most part. And then you got indigenous voters, Asian voters. You got a rise in South Asian voters in places like Georgia we saw, right? And you're going to have white voters, particularly younger college educated white voters, who are going to align with us. And so keep building on that, because demographically that's where we're headed. That's where we are as a country. There is no such thing as a white voter, as a swing voter, just white voters who don't like you, who don't like the fact that you also have a heavy influential black presence in your party, or, dictating the terms of your agenda. The late great Terry Smith, a law professor who unfortunately passed away last year, had just wrote this book that came out in January of 2020 called White Lash. And he talks about that. He talks about black law professor, and he talks, and it was just, and I had interviewed him a couple of times. And, he was just talking about how, like, it's like the way that white voters are, like, you're not going to get these folks back, but they keep going after them. So that's something that is all these forced errors. We see that. We're seeing it happen in New Jersey because it's white Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, even New York State, where they voted against those ballot measures to enhance voting rights. These are like white suburban voters, especially Karens, who are like, get uncomfortable every time we start getting closer to it being, as Public Enemy used to say, a black planet. It's fear of a black planet. It's fear of a black electorate, or any time where we start seeing signs of black electorate, or black voters especially, flexing their political muscle. We flexed a lot of muscle. So, the other piece of that too, Danielle, and because we were talking about this just a couple of days ago on WURD.
Just a couple of days ago on the show. Yeah.
It does create a conundrum, and it creates a difficult position for us as black voters, because we do have a responsibility as a black electorate to flex every time there is an election cycle. And there's going to be an election cycle, state, local, federal, every 6 months. And so, but we get into this conversation every cycle where we're making a mad dash to frantically get people to register to vote, to get people turned out to vote. And all of this should be rote. It should be just, automatic, but it's not. And so let speak to that. Like you were talking about how, like, the psychology of this dilemma that we're in, we want to turn out to vote, but it doesn't seem like we're getting the kind of support, the mobilization support we need.
You know what it is? It's because Democrats never put money in our communities in the way they are. We are always the ones that you want to lay your hat on to say, this is why we didn't get elected. I heard it right after the numbers started to switch in Virginia. I heard white pundits on television saying, well, black turnout was really low. Well, wait a minute. But white rage turnout was really high. So tell me why we aren't having a segment on that. But to your point, in 2017, we saw what I always thought was the impossible happen in Alabama. You saw a Democratic U.S. senator get elected in a state that is the most red of red states, Confederate of Confederacy states. Right? And why did that happen? Because black women, rallied to the cause and said, we don't want this pedophile representing us. We don't want this racist representing us. And that was with the absence of money from the DSCC and the DNC, because they look at these red states, and where Republicans see opportunity, and whether that opportunity is coming in 10 years, 20, 30, or 40 years down the road, Democrats write off. And they're like, well, if this is not going to be an easy win, we're not going to put the investment there. And their assumption is that black people have no place to go. So I don't need to give you anything, right? Because where are you going to go? You're going to go to the neo-fascist Confederates right now? No, you're not. So you have no choice. But the thing is, black people always have a choice. BIPOC people always have a choice. Right. And Democrats had a choice in this election too. Because the things that we haven't talked about yet are the two people that are the reason why Democrats didn't have anything to run on, right? Because you couldn't just run on not being Trump. The two people whose hat this loss can be hung on is Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Why is that? Because those are the two people that did not want to get rid of the racist institution we know as the filibuster, that did not want to vote for voting rights, that did not want to put together a bipartisan infrastructure bill and get that passed. Because as of a couple of days ago, Joe Manchin once again holds a press conference to say that he has some misgivings about the debt. Well, what about our democracy? What about the depth of empathy that we have in this country? What about the debt that we have right now in terms of the fact that our democracy is not secure? And now the Republicans have gotten hip because they have the younger, slicker Donald Trump coming right up, and now they have a play map for what 2022 is going to look like. So, you know, for me, it's like, why don't we have the investment? And somebody had asked me the other day, you know, on social media, they're like, Danielle, do you think that it is strategic, or is it really that they just don't know? And I'll ask that question to you, Charles. I'm like, is this strategic on the part of Democrats? Like, is there a reason why that is it their own innate racism? Why they will not embrace the BIPOC constituency that is making up the wholeness of this party? Is it strategy in the way that they are hoping to get the white voter back?
It's partly misplaced strategy in the sense that there is a fear, okay, you know, in terms of the on the part of the like white Democratic establishment, right? There is this fear of like folks like so-called white swing voters, no such thing, but white swing voters, white working class voters, white women, suburban voters, that fear to, you know, clap back or to let them know that, hey, listen, your position is wrong. Let us show you another way, or join our fold, join our coalition. So there's that fear, you know, of going against them. Because they're so worried about losing them. So there's partly misplaced strategy. It's partly racism and privilege, just being dismissive. And that's not just white Democrats, that's white Republicans. That's just, you know, generally speaking, that's white people in the political and public affairs space. And I'm saying this as someone who's been in that space as a practitioner for a long time. And, you know, that general dismissiveness, they do that with us in media. Where they don't think that we could, like this conversation you and I are having right now, you know, black man, black woman having a conversation about politics. Generally speaking, white people in media and political media don't think we can have these kinds of conversations at high levels. And we disprove them every day on programs like this or programs like mine on WURD. So there's that. You know, there's also, you know, this sense that, you know, we're going to give them too much control. They don't want us to have the kind of control or to show or to have us exercise the kind of dominance and influence that we need. You know, that question which you were just saying, Danielle, about how they're not making the investments. It's going to be really important heading into 2022 for Democrats, for the Democratic Party. And Jamie Harrison, as the DNC chair, should know this. They're going to have to make those investments in time and energy and resources and constant daily conversations with community and BIPOC media, especially like black media. Like, I'll tell you every day, WURD, the only black-owned talk media station in the entire state of Pennsylvania, won Philadelphia and then Pennsylvania for Democrats for Biden in 2020. Full stop. We did it because we're the black supervoter station. So we set the tone. So you got to make those investments in, like, whether it's WURD in Philadelphia or WAOK in Atlanta or you know, WVON in Chicago. If you're trying to run in a really strong way, you got to have direct conversation. You can't just, they're just expecting us to watch and to trust white-owned media, predominantly white media, like a CNN or an MSNBC. They're thinking, no, at the end of the day, black supervoters, motivated voters in those BIPOC communities, even like Latino voters, they trust their own outlets and their own platforms that they listen to every day, whether we're talking about politics or whether we're running the top 40 like hip hop songs of the day, right? You know, that's who they're listening to. And they still refuse to make those kinds of investments, or they do it at the very last minute. Like, you know, just they give us the crumbs after they've spent all their money on predominantly white media, and also on, they need to do it in terms of consultants and strategic advisement. They're just not, it's still kind of, they're still relying on some of the same recycled and overworn strategists and practitioners and also playbooks. And so that's got to change in a really dramatic and fundamental way as we head into 2022. We did see flashes of it. Like we saw it in Alabama. We saw it in Virginia in 2017. But there are other states where there could be potential pickups for Democrats. Even in the South, there should be no reason, Danielle, while we have southern states like Mississippi where 40% of the residents are black. So it's like, what, 35 to 40% of the electorate is black, and you can't win a Senate seat. That makes no sense. You should be able to do that.
My God, just listening to you, Charles, lay out that number just of Mississippi alone. 40% of the state is black, and yet have they ever had a black senator? No. And when we look at these numbers, right, we also have to see the other machinations that are at play, which is the fact that if you commit a crime in certain states, right, then you lose your right to vote. We saw that happen in Florida, where the voters said, no, those people have already paid their dues and then they should be reinstated. Their full citizenship should be reinstated. And then the Republican electorate bucked those voters. So when we look at the demographics, we also, of these states, of these southern states, we also have to look at the policies and the laws that they have on the book that either make it damn near impossible for black people to vote on purpose, right? So whether that is holding felonies against them and taking away the right to vote, whether it's holding debt against them, right? If you have a certain amount of debt in some states, that also eliminates your right to vote. And then you have the regular, run-of-the-mill voter purging and what have you. And then the recognition that who am I voting for? Yet another white person that is not going to do anything for me, that I have seen over the last decade after decade, that my lot in life does never change. And so I think that's part of the situation too. And how I look at this, you mentioned Jamie, and Jamie has come on Woke AF, right before he became the head of the DNC. And we have a lot of really smart black people and people of color that are in positions of power, whether it be at the DNC, the DS, the D-Trip, and in the Biden administration. And I'm wondering, and here's my question for you. I'm wondering, are we falling prey to the black faces in high spaces?
We are.
Right? Or is it that these people who are in this place, that they are being listened to, that they are being heard, and they're developing strategies that they know will actually work?
I think we have gotten complacent as a black black media, black advocacy, black practitioner class. We've gotten very complacent. We've gotten into these positions, each of us as individuals, have gotten into these positions of influence into an administration or into an elected office, and we're not understanding, or we're not recognizing or remembering, where we came from, who our original constituency is, the original constituency that got us elected or into that position in the first place. We need to go back to the block and listen to back to the block and see what they're saying. Like I was at this event in Philadelphia yesterday. That's a election cycle tradition where all the black elected officials get together at some black-owned restaurant in North Philly, and they hobnob. And I'm just looking around. It was the first time, and we were doing a broadcast from WURD. First time I ever did it. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, you folks don't get it. Like they were all just casual. And like, that there is no sense of urgency, that the times that we live in are not precarious, that everything's okay. And then look at what happened. They had losses across the board, even in Pennsylvania in the judicial races. And so there's this detachment, and we have to reattach it between the grass tops. Those are the grass tops folks and the grassroots. We need to reattach that, especially it's an imperative, particularly for our community. The second thing is that we have to understand that, we perfected voter and grassroots mobilization as a black political media advocacy class back during the civil rights movement, even before the civil rights movement. And so we need to revisit and also reintroduce those lessons and those strategies and methods. That's how white evangelicals are doing well, because they basically bit off our rhyme. They took it out of our playbook. The way that you activate large voting blocks and populations, and even, take over things like school board meetings. The messaging is really off too, where so that failure, that epic failure of the black media class really needs to take some blame for what happened yesterday, for not having these direct conversations, these motivating conversations with the black electorate to get them ready for big races like in Virginia and New Jersey. And two, being so detached, like, they're just satisfied with cocktails and conferences and galas, even virtually. And it's like, we don't have time for that. It's, we have to get real serious. This is life and death now. Another thing, that struck me too, Danielle, is in terms of the messaging and the various issues that were discussed during particularly this crop of races, and how Terry McAuliffe's team, especially, they were talking about how, they were separating issues, like they were saying, we need to talk about, issues that are important to the general population, like economy, jobs, public safety, and education. And, progressives need to learn that their issues like climate crisis, immigration, things of those, they're over there. And I'm like, all these issues are all intersected. I think Democrats could find real power and leverage the intersectionality of various issues. Climate crisis is really the number one issue for everyone.
Yep.
Because we're not going to live if we don't have clean air, clean water, and everything else. And so you can make that a frontline issue for everyone.
Y'all were underwater in parts of Pennsylvania not a couple of weeks ago, right?
Yeah, canal in Center City.
Absolutely underwater.
Yeah.
And so, when we decide to your point, to silo out these issues, to make it seem like they are not connected, everything is connected to our economy. The fact that Joe Manchin wanted to take paid family leave out of the BBB bill. Well, what does that mean? That's attached to the economy. That is people's ability to go back to work. If I can't cross a bridge because the bridge is underwater and my car is underwater and the subway stations are flooded, that is going to affect my ability to put food and medicine on the table. And this is the thing. This is just logic. I don't need a degree in climate change in order to be able to understand the connections to the economy, and the fact that we don't have billions of dollars each and every year, that there are historic forest fires and historic 1,000-year floods and historic hurricanes and superstorms. Where is that money coming from? Do you have a money tree over in Philadelphia that you picking off $100 bills from to give off to the federal government so that they won't do anything Exactly. Oh, let me tell you about Build Back Better Act. That's the other thing too. We just found out a few weeks ago, just 10% of Americans knew what was in that. so we've been having this months-long conversation about this $3.5 trillion bill and this infrastructure bill over here. It's like Biden, President Biden thinking he can get this done through having people watch the negotiations, and we're just going to just magically understand what everyone is doing and what they're talking about. And here, vast majority of people don't even understand that was the Build Back Better Act. And now we just lost a 5% cap on child care expenses. Can you imagine? The average household spends 50% of their income on child care. I know this as a father of 3. And I'm like, child care expenses are not fun. And we just had an opportunity. We just missed a golden opportunity. How are you not able to sell that? Where people could have actually had their child care expenses capped to 5% of their income, and the rest of the child care, the 95% of the child care, Danielle, subsidized by the federal government. And it was just $3.5 trillion. It was just $350 billion a year over 10 years. So we were getting that cheap. I mean, how can you fail on selling all this on stuff like that? Or even with the Manchin, he's like, well, I got to look out for my coal people. They keep not coming up with the counter messaging. Easy counter message to that is okay, well, Joe, you can stick over here with old school fossil fuel economy, which right now, last I checked, is losing jobs. And also you're losing market share. Or you can go to new school clean energy economy and get your folks in West Virginia on board. That's creating jobs right now. That's actually creating jobs way faster. The fossil fuel economy is losing jobs, not even creating jobs. It's being able to show, that's the other thing is that Democrats and, even some progressives, they're too cerebral. It's you got to be punchy, and you got to also come up with crystal clear, sharp messaging to make folks back on the block. Because if my folks back in the northern section of Philly, back in the Logan section of Philly, on the block, literally, are not understanding these conversations about child care, about climate crisis, about the disruptions the economy are going through,
you're not going to be able to motivate or mobilize them. And that's the other thing. Republicans are very good at that. They come up with very crisp, repetitive, clear, crisp messaging. And Democrats, for some reason, after years and years of getting like clocked every time on this, they still, but there are people like you, like me, and others we have on like our shows who know how to do this, but they don't want to listen to us. They keep being dismissive. The white privilege sets in. They're like, no. You can't, you're not smart. You don't know what you're talking about. It's like, okay, keep losing another election then.
You know what? Before we wrap today, one of the things that I do want to touch upon is what Minneapolis lost. So Minneapolis had up on to vote to defund, right, the police force there. This is following what we all witnessed as the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight in May of 2020. And following that, they had put a ballot measure on up for a vote to reorder those funds into more of a community-centric safety kind of committee where the police would not have as much power as they do. That measure, Charles, failed yesterday.
It did, yeah.
And it was, I'm not shocked by the fact that it failed, because I think that, one, it was going to be historic. It's the first time anything of this grandeur in terms of dealing with the problem of policing in our country was ever put up in this type of way. Right. What do you make of the ballot measure going down, and where do you think this conversation goes next in terms of defunding the police and reimagining what public safety looks like?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Danielle. Especially coming from someone whose hometown right now is being ravaged by high gun violence. We have nearly 500 murders already in the month of November, and we had 500 murders last year. We have the highest per capita murder rate in Philadelphia right now. And so, first of all, I'll say this. I've been, kind of vocal in this conversation. I felt like, I come from a messaging strategy background, and so I felt like defund the police, that kind of phrasing, was a little bit misplaced. I do think that there needs to be a reinvention and a dramatic overhaul of the police has to happen. We need to actually transition from policing to public safety. I would have gone for more like something like purge the police, because you can defund the police all you want, but the white nationalists and the insurrectionists, the white racists that shoot us and stop us and harass us every day, they're still going to be there. So you need to purge those police departments. Let's talk about, so I would have been like hashtag purge the police. So I do think, when you start, talking to the electorate, first of all, you have to understand that half the country doesn't read above a 6th grade reading proficiency. I mean, we have like high illiteracy rates in the United States. And so, folks who are trying to push sinister agendas are able to do that very easily because people are not very literate. So you're going to have to kind of be very schoolhouse rock about the way you go about selling your messages. And so you have to kind of come up with messaging or phrasing that's not about taking things away from something or someone, but actually crystallizes what you're going to give to people. Even with the conversation on taxing the wealthy, I agree with it, totally agree with it, but I think you're going to have to reconfigure that language a little bit, because then you're going to have Republicans or conservatives and libertarians are going to say, see, you're trying to take money, you're trying to penalize people who make money. And you even have like poor black folks going with that. Like, look at them trying to steal their money. So, focus more on the system. It's the systems. We need to tax the institutions, tax the banks. What about these, there was, I think they were doing like a transaction tax in Europe. And we had a former black congressman a long time ago from Philly who was trying to pass a transaction tax. You tax 1% of all transactions coming out of Wall Street, you eliminate the national debt.
Come on.
Or the deficit. Yeah, so it's like, see, that people can get on board with. But so I think defund the police was a bit misplaced. I would have preferred, and so I wasn't surprised. And the other thing that happened here too, Danielle, and we haven't been having a national conversation about as a black community, is there are really high surges of violence in all the major urban centers, including Minneapolis. And so people are scared. And the only thing they know how to do is call the police. And so we haven't had a collective community powwow or sit in the living room or in the church and say like, hey, how do we fix this? How do we address this? Instead, we're kind of handling it and like, haphazardly managing it in localized ways. And so in the meantime, that people, black folks are scared, and they're living in neighborhoods where there's high gun violence, high homicides, we've had over 1,800 people just alone in 2021 shot in Philadelphia, in addition to the nearly 500 murders. So people are like, the only thing they know is the police, instead of smart, innovative, new policing ways, which we do need to get there, because here's the last point: the police are underperforming. We need to have that conversation. So it's like, we're talking, they're trying to get us on defund the police, but it's like, y'all aren't doing your jobs, because while we getting shot and maimed and killed, you're not catching the perpetrators, the few people out there who are shooting. So I wasn't surprised that was going to happen. I knew that was going to happen in Minneapolis, because you got scared people who don't have that imagination, and who have leaders in the community who are not, painting for them a portrait of a new kind of public safety paradigm that we do need to get to. And so it is a complex conversation, but I honestly think it can be countered effectively as we head into 2022. I really do.
I appreciate you so very much, Charles. I love this conversation, and we still clearly have much work ahead of us to do. Thank you for listening to Democracy-ish. I am Danielle Moodie, and I want to give a great appreciation to my guest co-host today, Charles D. Ellison. Check out his show, Reality Check, on WURD. That is it for us, folks. We will be back next week if, in fact, God willing, we still have a country.